Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Zelia Edgar. Welcome to my show. Today, I'm going to set about debunking some of the narratives from Ryan Murphy's Netflix series Monster: The Ed Gein Story. I've been researching the Ed Gein case for the past 3 years and compiling all of my work into Ed Gein After the Killing Frost, a novelization of the true events in the Gein affair. And today, we're going to be talking about Adeline Watkins, what's true and what's false. So, Adelaide Fern, better known as Adeline Watkins. You may know her as one of those two gorgeous vixens trying on bullet bras in the very first episode. Yet, Adeline remained a firm fixture throughout the entire series, portrayed as Gein's pretty serious sweetheart, long-term girlfriend, even visiting his home, even seeing his mother set up in the chair, a lot like that infamous scene from that one movie, what was it called, Psychotic or something? And even making an appearance visiting him much later at the mental hospital. In reviewing newspaper and magazine coverage of the Gein case, right up there with headlines about the case itself, news about who the victims might be, the actual facts of what Gein did, you start seeing these headlines covering his romance with Adeline Watkins. Wooed by Slayer, nearly wed Gein, woman reveals. Gein, kind man, says woman who almost married him. These are examples of some of the headlines used talking about these claims that Adeline Watkins had been actively dating Gein for 20 years, but only broke it off when he tried to propose to her. Claims saying that she felt like she wasn't good enough for him, that he was sweet and kind, and kind of implying that he was so gentle and innocent that she had to, quote, drag him to a tavern when she wanted a beer, even though he just wanted a milkshake. Poor Ed. Now, this is all from the hullabaloo of November 1957, right after Gein was found. Then, in December of 1957, in the Stevens Point Journal, you get this really slim strip of newsprint that says, Woman declares Gein romance was exaggerated. Now, in this, Adeline said that her initial interview, which kicked off all of these claims, was with the Minneapolis Tribune, so a non-Wisconsin paper, not saying that it has anything to do with anything, but that the Minneapolis Tribune had actually contained untrue statements and vast exaggerations of what she'd said. Then this interview was picked up and splashed across headlines, not just throughout the Midwest, but nationwide. Now, in my opinion, it really added a certain living sexuality to a case that was already bringing very taboo concepts to the forefront of the public mind, and further sensationalized an already extremely hot case. True enough, Adeline Watkins had known of Gein for about 20 years. Not that they'd been sweethearts for 20 years, just that the Watkins family did live kind of in the neighborhood of the Gein residence from 1933 to 1941. However, the Geins and Watkins did not know each other, they weren't friends at this time. And in 1941, Adeline and her parents moved to Watoma, a nearby town, for several years before returning to Plainfield in 1954 following the death of her father. It was around this time that she became acquainted with Ed, likely through him doing odd jobs for her mother. Adeline explained that Ed had intermittently called on her for about 7 months, and that the extent of this was visiting her at her and her mother's home, which Gein did quite a bit with many other members of the Plainfield community, and that she and Ed had attended the Plainfield Theater together a few times. She had certainly never been to his home, and absolutely had never seen any evidence of his crimes. Now, neither she nor her mother Edith had referred to him as sweet, only that he was quiet and polite. And actually, to sum up her feelings for the man, she said that she, quote, felt rather sorry for him. So, as is pretty obvious, Adeline's constant reappearance and presence in the Gein soap opera is so patently untrue. However, my biggest issue with her appearance in this is this. In the series, it is shown that she is the one who gave Ed a pulp magazine that had a story on the infamous Bitch of Buchenwald, Ilse Koch, a Nazi war criminal who commissioned implements like lampshades to be made out of the remains of Holocaust victims, among other atrocities that she committed. To be perfectly clear, Ed loved his magazines. I will tell you, one of the most chilling images I found of his home, which is weird to say because this image did not contain any of the graphic images of the crimes that he committed, which are obviously terrible, atrocious, and chilling in their own right. But one that made me just feel odd, kind of unaccountably, was just a picture of one of the rooms in his home with a stack of pulp magazines in it, including Weird Tales and Amazing Stories, among others. And if you zoomed in on the picture, you could actually see that one of the stories in the magazine was penned by Robert Bloch, famed author of Psycho. So just kind of a weird Ouroboros, you know? But anyway, Ed loved his pulp magazines, his men's magazines, detective magazines, and at that time, images and stories of the horrors of the Holocaust were being published. He had these materials of his own free will, not because his non existent girlfriend gave them to him. Now, I will go into a much deeper dive on Ed's fascination with these reading materials in the coming weeks, as it's an intriguing conversation about the perceived culpability of media in crime, something which, of course, is still widely discussed today. But for now, I'll say spoiler alert: a magazine didn't make Ed do anything. I mean, sure, maybe it gave him a notion of what he wanted to do with the human materials that he took from his victims. But the urges were far older than even the very first acquisition of a magazine. They definitely predate that in Ed's life. In this action of giving Adeline the magazine in the first episode, in her giving it to Ed, this show is taking the responsibility for Gein's crimes out of his hands and placing them into the hands of a woman who, in truth, didn't even know him at the time represented in the show. Two, Adeline Watkins, like many residents of Plainfield, was mistreated and misrepresented by the firestorm of press agents who visited the small town in the wake of Gein's crimes. Adeline was made into a character back then, just as she's being characterized in the Netflix show, as a corrupting Jezebel of a woman dragging Gein into taverns when simple, sorry Ed just wanted a milkshake at the drugstore. It's sad to see that she is still being so misrepresented today. And no, she certainly didn't visit him either at Mendota State Hospital or the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane and have a heart to heart about the pros and cons of being medicated for psychological issues. Needless to say, also, the side plot of her wanting to run off to New York where she would be a crime scene photographer is absolutely fabricated as well. She showed no interest in being a forensic scientist or photographer. Um, she did say that she and Ed discussed murders. However, this again was in the Minneapolis Tribune article, so the truth of that is, I mean, definitely up for debate, I would say. Adeline Watkins died in 1992, having never married. She moved from Plainfield to Arpen, Wisconsin sometime in the 60s and converted to Jehovah's Witness later in her life. Also, it just, as a side note, this is bothering me. Actually, they got Adeline's mother's name wrong. It wasn't Enid, it was Edith. It's literally set in stone in one of the very graveyards that Ed robbed from, but it's just so patently obvious that they don't give a anyway. It's just a little obvious that, even if Ryan Murphy and the writers had so much as perused Find a Grave, shout out findagrave.com, excellent website, much less, area newspapers from the time that they decided to make a show about. Hell, if they would have even read Gein's Wikipedia page, they would have had better intel for this series than what they did. I'm aware it's a fictionalization, I'm aware it's a fictionalized account, but I do really think that in dealing with a case such as this, a case considered so deviant that still has such wide effects on culture, there's a certain burden to portray the truth in some way in the story, especially if you're claiming that, it's kind of a fictionalized account. Otherwise, you really have a lot of people then really confused. You'll have a lot of people believing that it wasn't Ed who read his magazines because he wanted to and found out about Ilse Koch's crimes. It was because his girlfriend told him about it, which I just think is, again, just kind of taking the burden off of the killer, off of the grave robber, off of the person who perpetrated these acts, and placing it on another person. So, yeah. If you want to hear more about this, I will be posting much more about how much I absolutely hated Monster, the Ed Gein story, and also just, interesting tidbits about what actually happened. But for today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Do